Okay, here we go. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, possibly, depending on where you are in the world. It's morning here for me. It's 11:11. Look at that. Make a wish. Um, so, I guess I'm going to officially say that this is the Pyrocast, which sounds so stupid, but, I figure that's the name that I should come up with. It's simple, effective, it's related to my channel name, so whatever. Maybe I'll call it something different down the road. For now, I don't give a shit. This is what we're calling it. So, um, today it's just me, uh, because there are several people that I've talked to about doing this with, and we just need to get it set up, right? But I kind of wanted to go ahead and get at least one episode out, if you want to call it that, because I kind of want to do a test run, right? And kind of want to get some feedback on what you think would be some good ideas on what we talk about. One thing that I do want to kind of focus on with the podcast is just everybody telling stories about, stuff that's happened in their lives, right? But interesting stuff, right? Like nothing like, oh, well, this one time I went to McDonald's and I got a free cheeseburger, because. No, nothing like that. But more or less, one big topic that I want to kind of consistently talk about throughout is both supernatural, extraterrestrial, paranormal, just anything like that. And the reason I say that is because I feel like that's a good topic. I mean, most of everybody out there has something that's happened to them. Either they've experienced it or, something they heard or saw or whatever at a certain point in their lives where they just can't explain what it was, right? I personally have several stories. A lot of them happened, in my like younger years when I was a kid, also even during teenager, and I've had a couple even being an adult. Uh, One of the most recent ones was, pretty wild to me, and it's something that I hadn't had any sort of real strange paranormal experience for a long time, like a few years. Um, but anyway, so I am gonna tell a couple of stories. I'm probably not gonna tell my best one for this. I'll probably wait until I get with, a group, uh, and we can share stories. Um, but one of and this is more extraterrestrial related. This isn't like paranormal ghost spirit type thing. This is I would definitely classify as extraterrestrial. Sorry, I've got something in my eye here. So I'm originally from North Carolina. For those of you who don't know, and when I was a kid, I spent most of my childhood between a city called High Point, North Carolina, and um, as I got it to be about, I want to say when we moved to this town when I was maybe 9 years old, is about the time frame I'm thinking. Um, and we moved to a small country town called McLeansville, North Carolina, which is not far from High Point. It's not a super, long distance, but it's definitely more country. And that's, if you haven't been to North Carolina, that's kind of the weird thing about it, is there's so many places that are very heavily populated, big city, and there's some that are just barren wastelands of field, and that's it, and there's not shit for miles. So um, I hear a lot of people that aren't from North Carolina, or see people online talking about, North Carolina's just like some country hit place, and it's really not like that. It definitely has its parts. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's just like any other state for the most part. There's, you have heavily populated cities, you have small country towns, you have, the in between, whatever, both urban, suburban, what have you. So we moved to this town, and I lived in a small neighborhood. Well, actually, it was a pretty good sized neighborhood, actually. And, we had a really nice big backyard. It was a good place to be as a kid, right? We had a pool. It wasn't a super fancy in-ground pool, but it was one of those above ground that was maybe 4 or 5 feet deep, somewhere in that range. So anyway, I don't want to rabbit trail too much. Just kind of giving you a description of where this happened. So at the time, I had a few friends that I knew in the neighborhood, and in fact, one of my longtime best friends I met when we moved there, and he lived probably about 3 houses down from me on the other side of the street. So it was really cool, like during summer vacation, because to go hang out with my best friend, I didn't have to like ask my parents for a ride. He didn't have to ask his mom for a ride. It was a pretty simple, you know, thing. I could just walk to his house and be there in 30 seconds. So anyway, one night during summer vacation, I'm going to say that we had lived there for maybe about a year and some change, if not 2 years. In the middle of the summer, and usually during the summertime, it doesn't get fully dark until about 9:15 to 9:30 at night. So this is like in the middle of July, in the middle of summer vacation. I'm probably, like I said, 10, maybe 11 years old. And I just asked my parents, I said, hey, can I go to, my friend's house? And they're like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever, because the main rule was, had to be home by dark, like most kids, But it wasn't quite dark yet. The sun was setting, and the sky was still somewhat lit, but I guess you would call that dusk. Is that what you would call that? I'm not sure. The sun had just gone down below the horizon, but the sky was still lit up because it had just gone down. It had just set. So, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because, when what I'm about to tell you is most people say, well, you said it was, 9 o'clock at night. Are you sure you weren't just seeing things? No, it was still bright. It's in the middle of the summer, daylight savings time, whatever. So I gotta leave, and I think I walked out of the house like close to 9 o'clock, 8:45, 9 o'clock. And I'm walking down my driveway, and something catches the corner of my eye. And I look up, and it's probably 12 feet above the ground, right? And it's an orb, and it's a perfect sphere, okay? This thing is not massive, but I'm going to say that size, it's probably 2 times the size of a NBA grade men's basketball, right? Which those are pretty big, they're bigger than like the normal basketball that you would get if you just went to a sporting goods store. But anyway, so and I see this thing just floating. There's no noise to it whatsoever. It's not making any sort of noise. It was non-reflective, right? Like there was a street light, few houses down, that I saw it passing under as it was coming towards me when I was at the end of my driveway. And there was no light reflecting off of it. It didn't have a glossy sheen to it. It had a very flat, like it was intentional for it to not be reflective. And it had a couple of small antennas on it. And when I say small, like very small, kind of at the top, it actually looked, I know this sounds very cliche, but if you've seen Star Wars, it looked very identical to that little floating droid that Luke uses in A New Hope, like towards the beginning of the movie, when he first like gets a lightsaber and it's shooting the little lasers at him. It looked kind of like that thing. That's the best way that I can think to describe it or compare it to. But it didn't have any lights on it. It wasn't lit up, but the core of it had a glow, right? It had a orangish kind of an orange colored glow. And again, it was hovering right. It was kind of following the side of the road, but hovering about 12 feet above that. So it was right there for me. I mean, I was probably, close to 5 feet tall at that point, I think. Because again, I was, 10, maybe 10 years old. And I just froze. And I stopped and I looked at it and I'm like, what the fuck is that? So, I quickly kind of power walked up to the end of the driveway because it was coming, getting ready to pass my driveway. And I watched this thing right there in front of me just go, and it moving very slow. It was making no noise whatsoever. And it was literally moving at a snail's pace, probably at max 2 miles an hour, right? So I start following it because it's starting to head down the street towards the direction that I need to go. So I start following it, and I'm like almost right up under it at this point. And it starts moving faster. So I start moving faster, and I'm starting to jog, and then I'm starting to full on sprint. Well, by the time that I had gotten to my friend's house, to his driveway, this thing literally, it was some shit straight out of a movie, okay? This thing went invisible, I guess you could say. It had a camouflage type. I don't know how to put it into words. It camouflaged itself and went invisible, but it was kind of you could still sort of see that it was there. It kind of had a ripply look to it. You could still kind of see that it was there. And then it flashed this super extremely bright light that literally blinded me, and I just, and the moment I opened my eyes, it had uncamouflaged and just took off into the sky and was out of sight within 2 seconds, right? I mean, it was literally something you'd see out of a movie. This thing moved at absolute lightning speed. So I ruled it out as, I don't even think at the time drones were a thing. Because I'm going to say that this was around the year 2002, 2003, maybe. So that would mean that we didn't really publicly have drones. These days, anybody can go out and buy a drone. But at that point, not really. I'm sure they were in the military at that point. I'd have to look that up. But definitely not. It wasn't a drone. Because even if you think about today's drones, they're loud, they're large, they're noticeable. Even if you buy a small one, they're loud, you can hear them. This thing made no noise whatsoever. And it had a very strange pattern to it. It was a very, very dark grayish green color. And then it had a sort of transparent look to the pattern itself. It was almost like a curved crosshatch pattern. I don't really know how to describe it. But within those lines, that was the transparent part, and that's how you could kind of see that very, very faint orange glow. Most people wouldn't notice this thing, right? I just happened to notice it because I think it was just perfect timing, perfect place. And this thing obviously did not want me to see it. Very obviously, it did not want me to see it, and it pulled the whole Men in Black, memory wiping thing on me and just took off, right? And of course I'm like, holy shit! So I run inside my buddy's house and I'm like, you're not gonna believe what the fuck I just saw, dude! And I'm freaking out, and he's like, what? And so I was like, come outside, maybe we can still see it. And so we go outside. Obviously, it's gone. It's way gone. I mean, it was gone in the 2 seconds after it flashed its light at me or whatever the fuck it did. And I'm hyperventilating at this point because I had never seen something like that. I'd had a couple of supernatural kind of experiences that I couldn't explain, and maybe it wasn't supernatural. I don't know. But this was very much real, right there in front of me. There was no way for me to explain it. And I'm like, please tell me you believe me. Please tell me you believe me. Please, you know, and I'm like thinking I'm crazy. And he's like, no, 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 I believe you. I believe you. I believe you. And to this day, I will never forget that. It was the just wildest thing. And, you know, anytime I've told this story to people, they're like, well, say that you really did see this thing. You know, for one, they talk about what time of day it was. And they're like, are you sure you weren't just seeing stuff? Maybe your depth perception was off because it was late at night? No. It was still plenty bright outside for me to see this. So, ruled that out. Are you sure it wasn't a balloon? This was not a fucking balloon. I'm going to tell you that right now. This was not a balloon. It was very, very obviously not a balloon. And so, you know, I've ran it through my mind thousands of times over the years. And I still to this day cannot explain it. And I also want to clear up a couple of things too. Another thing that most people jump to is, well, maybe there was like some secret government, you know, testing thing going on. And I'm going to go ahead and say that's very, very, very unlikely for a couple of reasons. One, because we didn't live close to any sort of like military base. So, you know, probably not. The other thing is, if the government wanted to test something like what I witnessed, why the fuck would they do it in some small little country town like that? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. And again, this thing didn't want to be seen. It didn't want me. When it noticed that I was onto it, it was gone. I mean, there was no, you know, it almost seemed like the flashing light was a defense mechanism, I guess. Like it was trying to deter me and stun me a little bit so it could get away. Not that I had any remote chance of catching this thing whatsoever, but so I thought about it and I'm like, there's no way, because for one, what if it was a government, you know, like some secret U.S. government, you know, weapon or whatever it is, or even if it was just a drone, why would they be testing it in our little country neighborhood in fucking McLeansville, North Carolina? You know what I mean? I guess you could say, oh, well, it's a least inconspicuous spot, but I still don't buy it. I don't think that that would be the reason. And even today, especially when drones started becoming a thing and it got to where you could go out and buy a drone, I started looking online to see if I could find that thing. Nowhere to be found. I have no idea. There's like no evidence of this thing anywhere. I've done hundreds and hundreds of searches on the internet. I've dug in all kinds of places. I've even checked like, you know, extraterrestrial sightings, like websites and like, you know, conspiracy theorists, Reddits and all kinds of shit. And I can't find anything related to this. So I think it's just one of those really odd once in a lifetime occurrences. I will probably never see something like that ever again for as long as I live. And still to this day, cannot explain it. It is the just, it gives me chills every time I talk about it because, you know, I kind of get lost with my words when I start talking about it because I don't know what else I can say. You know what I mean? I don't know what else I can say at this point. Besides, that had to have been something from a different planet. That had to have been, like, extraterrestrial. For how fast that thing was, there's no way. I don't think we have any sort of technology, even now, that is that fast. It is just unexplainable for me. Because if you think about the time period, right? 2002, 2003... yeah, it's kind of hard to think of what it could have been, right? To try to explain it. So, I don't have any definitive proof. I've tried finding something to explain it, and I still cannot find anything that's even remotely close. If anybody has something, please email my YouTube channel. Email the channel. pyrosaurproductions@outlook.com. Please email me if you have anything related to that and what I've just described. And in fact, one thing I'm going to do, I am going to tell the story again in a later podcast once, other people are involved. And I'm going to see if I can actually do a sketch of what it looked like. It shouldn't be too hard for me to do. It's a ball, right? It's the pattern that I'm going to have to try to really, detail as best as I can. It almost resembled like a volleyball, right? It was resemblant to, how a volleyball has that kind of curved overlaying pattern to it. It was similar to that, but much more detailed and extravagant, and there was a lot more going on in the pattern itself. It looks like something out of a fucking Hollywood movie, right? It looks like something that you would see in a sci-fi fantasy film, right? And it was just so odd. And I even told my parents about it. My dad's like, oh, you were just seeing shit. And, my stepmom's like, oh, whatever. Huh, funny story. Cool. Yeah. And, of course, your parents aren't going to believe you when you tell them that. But I still stand by it to this day. And now, my parents do believe me, I think. Because still to this day, I'm still telling that story verbatim to the T. Nothing changed. And me and my dad got to talking about shit like this one night because we actually both experienced something not too long ago. It was about a year and some change ago that we experienced this, and I'll tell that story here in a second as well. But I told my dad this. I said, do you remember that time when we used to live in McLeansville and I was going to, my friend's house one night and I told you about the orb that I saw floating in the sky? And he was like, I do remember that. And I said, you do know I wasn't lying about that, right? And he was like, well, I mean, now that you're, pushing 30 years old and you're telling me that, and he was like, can you, remind me? So I retold the story to him again, and I was like, this is what happened. And I don't like using the word story because that makes it sound like it could be fiction. This is 100%, I'm not lying here. This is something that definitely happened to me. Or something that I experienced, right? Something that I witnessed, I guess is the best word. And so I told him about that, and we started exchanging, weird occurrences that we've had like that. So this one is odd. I'm going to say probably, it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I had just moved into the house that I'm in now. And I think it may have even been the first summer, or maybe it was last summer. I don't know. Sorry, I had to pause for a second. So, we were hanging out, having a few beers, grilling out, playing with the dog out in the yard, playing fetch. It was a nice day. It was me and my wife and my dad. And somebody else was there, I think. No, actually, my wife was at work. It was just me and my dad at this point. But people were coming over. This is 4 in the afternoon. Again, kind of in the middle of the summer. I'm going to say around early June. And I guess, is June considered summer? What's the first day of summer? I don't remember. But so I'm getting the grill ready, I think we were playing cornhole as well. I've got some nice cornhole boards that we were playing on, and we're just hanging out, shooting the shit. Well, we're sitting on my back deck, and in the middle of us talking, I don't remember if it was me or my dad that saw it first, but one of us looked up and was like, what the fuck is that? And we look up in the sky, and there's these little, almost bullet-shaped white objects that are definitely not planes, because that starts the description of a plane. This was not a plane. There were no wings. There was no tail. Usually a plane, for the distance that these were, if it was a plane, you'd be able to tell it was a plane, right? These were, about the same height that you would see a passenger plane, right? Flying through the sky. And we do live close to the airport. I do want to mention that. We do live relatively close to an airport. We're probably about 20 miles from it. So typically, any air traffic that we see is going to be kind of at a lower altitude, right? They're not fully up in the air yet. They're roughly very visible. If I drive, you know, 8 minutes up the road down the highway, I can see planes very close coming in and out of the airport. So, very close enough for us to be able to tell if they're planes or not. Well, first we see one, and it's in like a bullet / bean type shape, right? Kind of like a lima bean, I guess, but not quite as, lima bean's kind of like this. Not quite as curved, a little bit less. And it had no markings on it whatsoever. Again, these were also not reflective to light. The sun's smack in the middle of the sky, right? And they were not reflective to light, but you could see them. Like, light wasn't reflecting off of them. A plane, if you see them at the right angles, light will reflect off of them. And first we saw one, and then we started noticing there was a pair, right? And they're flying in perfect unison next to each other through the sky. And they're moving at a relatively good speed, not insanely fast where your eyes can't even keep up, but they're kind of going across. Well, then we see another pair come from another direction. They were coming from north, from southeast, from west. Like, we probably ended up seeing like 4 or 5 pairs of these flying through the sky, and then they just kind of disappeared. We pulled out our phones, of course, and recorded, or attempted to record, but I don't even think I kept my recordings, because with it being white against a clear blue sky like that, because no clouds out, by the way, it just wasn't all that good of a recording. It just made me think it's just going to look like one of those shitty recordings that you see online where somebody's like, oh my God, look at that. What is that? And you can't even really tell what it is. So I'd be willing to bet my dad probably still has his recording, though. And I think his actually looked better, because at the time he had a better phone than I did. But, we're sitting there like watching this happen for a good 15, 20 minutes. And eventually, excuse me, they did all disappear. But that was another one where, of course, as soon as it's done, I'm like, I'm going to see if I can find that online. Like, that's got to be some sort of aircraft, right? Nothing. Couldn't find anything. I found where people had similar sightings of a similar unidentified flying object. But another thing I want to mention is, again, no sound. Usually when a plane is flying above your house, you can kind of hear it. You hear that like in the sky. And you can hear it. These things, you couldn't hear. There was no volume to them whatsoever. And that's what kind of got me curious as I started thinking about it. And I started thinking back to any other UFO sightings I've seen before, and any other... And when I say UFO sightings I've seen before... Sorry. Thought I had my phone on silent. And then I started thinking about videos I've seen, TV shows I've watched about unidentified flying objects, and I don't ever recall any of them saying that they made a sound. Most UFO sightings, one thing that was reported, that there was no sound. It didn't make a noise. It didn't have an engine hum or anything like that. It was just, dead silent, flying through the sky. And every single unidentified flying object that I have seen have all had that same correlation of there's no sound to them, there's no volume, right? So I thought that was strange. I don't know what that means, but I don't know of any engines that we have an aircraft that are dead silent like that. If there are, I'm not familiar with them. That's another thing. If you know of something like that, please let me know. But those white bullets were very, very strange, and they were very large. That's another thing I want to add too. These were not small. They were very, very, very large aircraft, whatever they were. I'm going to say that they were probably about 3 times the size of a typical passenger plane. Yeah, they were big. I guess a Boeing is what you would call it. They were huge. And what was even stranger is when we saw this, you know, we see, again, we live close to the airport. We see planes pretty often. We didn't see any air traffic that day at all. And that was the other odd part is, you know, we were outside pretty much all day, right? We were outside from, you know, probably, I was outside from about 8 o'clock in the morning all the way until about 8 o'clock in the evening because I was doing some yard work, you know. And I didn't hear or see any air traffic coming through that whole day. And even when me and my dad witnessed this, didn't see anything. Didn't see anything else. So that was another really odd experience. If anybody has any sort of information about what that possibly could have been, again, please let me know and reach out. I would be really happy to check that out because it's another one that I just can't really explain. Not as crazy as the first story. The first story is that's something else. I really truly don't know how to explain that. But you know, again. So another one that I had was, it reminded me of the first floating orb, is what I like to call it. The floating orb reminds me of this. It wasn't as close of a interaction, though. It wasn't as close of an encounter. When I was fresh out of high school, so I'm going to say I was about 18, 19 years old when this happened. This was also back when I used to smoke cigarettes. I know, yeah. But back when I used to smoke, we lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is not far from High Point. It's probably 20 minutes, depending on what part of the city you're in. Greensboro is a pretty large city. It's pretty well populated. It's not quite as big as the capital, which is Raleigh. It's not quite as big as Raleigh, but it's I'd say Greensboro is in the top 5 biggest cities in the state, I would think. Greensboro is a pretty good size. So it still doesn't stand up to Raleigh or Charlotte, but again, it's up there. It's getting there these days. So we lived at kind of almost central Greensboro, I'd say. Central to north Greensboro is where we lived. We lived in a nice neighborhood. It was a pretty cool place, you know. Most of the people there were nice, except for the guy that lived behind us. He was a jackass. This guy liked to call the fire department if you had one little tiny fire pit going. Like, they're going to burn the damn neighborhood down. Just one of those people. So, anyway, I went out back one night to smoke and let the dog out while I'm out there. And so I'm one of those people, I like to look at the sky, right? A lot of people don't do that as they get older. They just don't think to, I guess. But I've always been one of those people that if it's a clear night and the stars are out, I'm going to look up and see what's going on in the sky, you know. I like seeing, you know, getting the chance to catch a shooting star, you know, or even just seeing planes go by. You know, I'm just kind of fascinated by that kind of stuff. So I know it's normal and, you know, it's day to day, but, you know, I'm all about space and, you know, just the cosmos in general. So I'm staying outside and I'm looking up at the sky. and I see a very, very large, bright light, and it's a orb shape, of course, flying very fast. I mean, and at first I thought, oh, a shooting star, cool. This wasn't a shooting star. For those of you who have never seen a shooting star, it's, of course, for one, it's not actually a star. That's just an expression. It's a piece of debris that's flying through our atmosphere, right? And what you're seeing is the split second of it making its way through. Usually when you see a shooting star, you see it lit up for a second, and then as it traces downward, it disappears, right? You see it for probably half a second to a second, right? And then it's gone. Well, that's not what happened here. This thing was flying in a direct straight line. Usually, in my experience in seeing shooting stars, they kind of curve as well. They kind of go downwards. This thing was following a straight linear path. And, almost directly above us, above our neighborhood, or really above that general area, because it was pretty high up. But it was bright and it was large. It's flying super fast, and it comes and it stops dead in its tracks right in the middle of the sky. Stops, hangs out for about 2 seconds, and then does like an acute turn in a split second and takes off and disappears. Again, we don't have any aircraft that can do that. Not to my knowledge. We do not have anything that can do that. Excuse me. I couldn't make out any sort of shape because this was late at night. You know, it's probably about 10 o'clock at night when this happened. I'm going to say it was late summer, so like mid-September, I think, is when this happened. And, it just stops and then sits there for about 2 seconds and then just, boom, goes kind of it doesn't even turn. You don't even see it turn. It just starts going in a different direction, I mean, it's like if you took your pencil on a piece of paper and went here and then all of a sudden went this way, right? That's basically what it did. And I'm going to say that the angle was about a 280 degree recourse from where it originally was. So, of course, I'm like, whoa. And probably 5 seconds after that, like 15 different planes. They looked like jets and they looked like military, because I could make that out. They were all the same. They were all very dark in color. The lights that were on them were not the kind of lights that are on a typical passenger airplane. And again, the shape was, you could tell they were like military jets of some sort. About 15 of these fucking things all come flying into that general area in the sky. And I'm watching this like, whoa. And they all come in and like, they're like circling and they're like, doing maneuvers to try to scan the area. And they're like trying to find this fucking thing, it looks like. And so I'm like, did I just witness like actual, UFO presence and the military's after it? Like, and they circled this area for a good probably 15, 20 minutes. I mean, that they just kept coming back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they're all like trying to find, it looked like they were trying to find this thing. This thing was long gone. They were not going to find this thing. And it also, from what I remember when it did take off, it also, I think, started going up and rising in altitude. So I don't know how to explain it. It was wild. Of course, next day I'm checking the news. I'm checking for anything, like, I'm checking anything and everything I possibly can. Nothing. In Greensboro, I think the closest, I don't think there's a military base in Greensboro, but there is one in, I believe, Fayetteville, which is a decent distance from Greensboro. So I don't see this being, again, a test or anything like that. And usually, I mean, you can look up and see when stuff like that occurs, right? You can go on the website and see if they've tested any sort of, aircraft or anything like that, and they'll, tell you what area it was in, and, usually you can do that, and nothing. I searched everything within a 100-mile radius. Nothing. Nothing that was in that area, right? So that one was kind of resemblant of the first orb that I saw when I was, 9-10 years old. And yeah, almost 10 years later, I see something very similar, but it's obviously much larger. I'm going to say this thing was the same size, if not a little bit bigger than the jets that came through. Now, granted, that's just based on the light that I saw. If this thing had a bigger shape to it, I couldn't see it. Because that light was very bright. It was very noticeable and very large. So that's another one that I just, can't really explain. I've had a couple others, and those aren't even my best sightings, I would say. The worst part about this is anytime that anything has happened, I've never had a phone to be able to get out and record. At the time, I had some shitty flip phone when that happened. I wasn't going to catch that on camera. Now, my iPhone, I did get the white bullets, but it didn't look all that good just because it was so bright outside, and those things were completely white and across a light blue sky. It was just hard to make them out, right? At least on my phone it was. If you had a good camera, you could have easily captured those. But anyway, so those are just some of the extraterrestrial, I would say, experiences that I've had. I've never had any seen an alien in real life. At least I don't think I have. Because there is one that happened when we were kids, when me and my siblings and my cousins witnessed this, and we all remember it to this day. Actually, I'll have to tell you that one too. So, anyway, I and if my brothers or my cousin are listening to this, they're gonna know exactly what I'm getting ready to talk about. That one time at Claymont Road, they're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about. So we were all kids, right? I want to say that I was probably, 10 years old, anywhere between 10 to 12 years old. A lot of those years, I don't remember exactly what age I was, but I was a kid, right? So it was me, my older brother, my two younger brothers, and my cousin. So all six of us, we're playing outside, whatever. Well, it's getting dark, and at this point it is dark. And we would even play outside in the dark again. Small country town, small country neighborhood. And this was kind of more country than where I was in McLeansville. This was in excuse me. That Coca-Cola's making me burp like hell. The town was called Bunn, and it's Bunn, North Carolina. Anytime I tell people about Bunn, North Carolina, they're like, where the fuck is that? And that's how a lot of small towns in North Carolina are. So we lived out there. I guess that was considered Bunn. Maybe it was considered Lewisburg or Zebulon. I don't know what it was considered, but I want to say it was Bunn. So anyway, we're playing outside. And outside we had one of those, it's those giant bushes that have, it looks like hair, I guess you could say. I forgot what you call those things. They kind of resemble cattails that you see at the beach. The forbidden corn dogs. But it didn't have the cattail part, right? It didn't have the forbidden corn dogs sticking out of it. But it had that, the leaves were really long. They were very rough. They felt prickly when you ran your fingers across them. And so we go outside, to go play. We're going to play hide and seek or some shit like that. And we started rounding the corner of that bush. And we all saw it for a split second. And we all saw it at the same time. And we all screamed and shit our fucking pants at the same time. Like, I swear to God, we all just, like, lost it. There was a very, very massive Yeti-like creature, okay? This thing had white fur. It had, like, sharp teeth. It was, it was fucking horrifying. It was like a Wendigo or something. I don't know what it was, but every single one of us screamed at the top of our lungs and ran back inside. And, of course, like, our parents are like, what are y'all freaking out about? And, like, you know, like, my younger brother's crying. Like, I think my cousin's crying. Like, several of us were crying and we're, like, freaking out. And I only got, like, a quick glimpse at it, but I will never forget that thing. Like, I think, in fact, my younger brother, not my youngest brother, there's a lot of us. He was closest to it, and I think my oldest brother, I think they were in front, and me and my cousin and my youngest brother were behind, as we were all walking out. And of course my parents are, like, freaking out, and they're like, you know, what is wrong? They thought, you know, like, there's an intruder on the property, right? Like, somebody's trying to break into the house, or, like, they were thinking, like, what's going on? So my stepdad, you know, he goes outside, like, to check out what's going on, walks around, there's nothing out there. Nothing. But we all saw the same thing, and we all freaked. And so he comes in, he's like, what are you guys freaking out about? You know, the ones of us that are crying are like, you know, they're, like, trying to get themselves together and explain what's going on. And we're, like, sitting here trying to say what's going on. And my mom and my aunt were like, you know, my aunt's like, what the fuck are y'all talking about? She's like, y'all are crazy. You've lost your damn minds. And all of us just kept saying we saw, like, a Yeti type creature, and it was huge. I mean, big, because this bush was probably 7 feet tall and about, you know, it was probably about 7 or 8 feet wide too. It was big. This thing was almost that size. Obviously it was not a bear, because we don't have bears out that way. And if we do, we don't have bears that big. It was all white, from what I remember. It was completely white and very furry. So, like, picture a very grotesque, morbid, twisted-looking polar bear. Like, that's probably the best way I could describe it to you. But anyway, so, you know, and to this day, we still talk about it occasionally. Like, if I get together, you know, with my brothers, like, you guys remember that Yeti incident over at Claymont Road? And they're like, I don't want to talk about it. You know, it's just one of those things that, you know, you just can't explain it. And in fact, that's one that I really want to talk about, because if I can get any one of them on the podcast, that's definitely a story that we're going to have to talk about and tell, because everybody kind of has their own way of telling it, right? And what they saw and what, you know, details they can provide about whatever that monster was, or creature, whatever you want to call it. Some wild shit, dude. Really some wild shit. And I don't know how to explain that one, because that one, like, 6 different people witnessed at once, and none of us to this day have any clue how to describe it, like how to put into words what it could have been. Just no idea. So, sorry, I typically don't drink just Coca-Cola, but I need some caffeine. So, anyway, I have plenty other stories. I really do. I have plenty of stories, but I don't want to go telling them all. I want to save some of them for, when we have other people appear on the podcast. And the podcast won't solely be focused around the supernatural and paranormal and extraterrestrial beings. We're not going to go just to that, but that will kind of be a prominent focus. Because I also want to talk about other, famous occurrences that have been reported. I think if you've never heard of the movie The Fourth Kind, you should watch that movie if you're into, extraterrestrial type stuff. That movie's fucking scary. And it's scary because apparently, and I've never actually gone to verify this, but the woman that appears in that movie, not the actress, because a lot of it is reenacted, but the actual woman that the events are based off of, you can tell something fucked her up permanently. Whatever experience she had with extraterrestrial aliens, right? Aliens. Whatever experiences it was that she had fucked her up for life. She is permanently scarred. And like permanently mentally scarred. It's really kind of unsettling, that whole movie. If you've never seen it, go check it out. It's actually really good. It sort of has a paranormal activity type feel to it, but that sounds like a deterrent, but it's not. It's a good movie. And it's supposedly based on true events. They reenacted it in the best way possible. And the reason it's called The Fourth Kind is because there's 4 different kinds of extraterrestrial, encounter. Right? There's the encounter of the first kind, the second, the third, and the fourth. And the fourth kind is like you get fucking abducted. They're shoving some weird shit up your ass, and you're not going to remember any of it happened, most likely. And then they're going to drop you back off. And then they're going to keep doing this shit to you until they're done. It's pretty terrifying to think about. So I want to talk about other stuff like that too, right? Like, what are your thoughts on it? And what, do you think this is actually true? Do you think this is possible? So on and so forth. So, anyway, I guess this is a good spot to end it. Thank you all for tuning in. And I'm hoping that here soon I'll be able to upload the next podcast and we can get into the nitty-gritty with some more wild stories like that. So, anyway, take care, everybody.